What if you were told that government intervention could potentially sabotage the labor market? Quite a thought, isn't it? Now, before we get into that, let's take a step back to understand labor market forces and their significance. These forces, essentially the supply and demand for labor, are instrumental in determining wage rates and employment levels. They shape the labor market landscape, influencing who gets hired, at what wage, and under what conditions. Now consider labor demand. It's what we call a derived demand. It's not direct, like you're craving for a cup of coffee. Instead, it's derived from the demand for goods and services that labor helps produce. Factors like technological advancements, product demand, and worker productivity can sway labor demand. Understanding these forces is key to appreciating how labor markets function and how government intervention can impact them. So let's delve deeper and unravel the intricacies of labor market forces. Ever wondered how your wage is determined? Well, it's a fascinating interplay of supply, demand, and a little something called the marginal revenue product theory, or MRP for short. Let's start with the basics. Demand for labor is derived from the demand for the goods and services that workers produce. If a product is in high demand, the firms producing it will need more labor, thus increasing the demand for workers. Conversely, if a product's demand decreases, so does the demand for the labor involved in its production. Now, what about the supply of labor? It's not just about the number of workers. Wage and non-wage factors also play a part. For instance, higher wages can attract more workers, increasing the supply. Non-wage factors can include anything from job security, working conditions, to the prestige of a job. These factors can either increase or decrease the supply of labor. But how do these two forces interact? Picture this. The demand and supply of labor are like two dancers, gracefully moving towards and away from each other. When they meet, or when demand equals supply, that's the equilibrium wage, the wage you get paid. Now, let's throw in the MRP theory. Think of MRP as the revenue a firm earns from employing an additional worker. If the MRP of a worker is higher than their wage, the firm will hire more workers. If it's lower, the firm will hire less. In essence, MRP helps firms determine how much labor they need. So you see, your wage is not just a number, it's where the dance of demand and supply meets the rhythm of MRP. It's an economic ballet, choreographed by the market forces and performed by firms and workers. So the interplay of supply, demand, and MRP determines your wage. But what happens when the market isn't perfect? Well, that's a question for another scene. Stay tuned. What if your employer is the only game in town? That's a question that takes us into the realm of imperfect labor markets. In these markets, the typical laws of supply and demand can be skewed or even overturned by various factors. First, consider trade unions. These organizations harness the collective power of workers to negotiate wages and working conditions. In an ideal world, the bargaining power of a union helps to balance the inherent power of the employer. However, if a union becomes too powerful, it can push wages above the equilibrium level, potentially leading to unemployment. Next, let's talk about government interventions. Minimum wage laws are a common form of intervention. They set a floor for wages, with the aim of ensuring a basic standard of living for workers. But, like with unions, the impact isn't always straightforward. If the minimum wage is set too high, it can lead to unemployment, as employers may not be able to afford to hire as many workers. Finally, consider the monopsony employer. A monopsony is a market with only one buyer, in this case, one employer. Think about a small town with only one major employer. That employer effectively sets the wage, since workers have nowhere else to go. This can result in wages being set below the equilibrium level, and potentially below what is fair or sustainable for the workers. So, in an imperfect market, the traditional forces of supply and demand may take a back seat to power dynamics and policy decisions. But it's important to remember that these factors aren't inherently bad. Trade unions, minimum wage laws, and even monopsony employers can have positive impacts. The key is finding a balance that ensures fair wages and employment opportunities for all. In an imperfect market, the traditional forces of supply and demand may take a backseat to power dynamics and policy decisions. Remember, economics is not just about numbers and graphs, it's about people, their livelihoods, and the policies that shape our collective well-being. Why does a software engineer earn more than a high school teacher? This question brings us to the intriguing topic of wage differentials. In simple terms, wage differentials are variations in pay between different jobs or within the same job. These variations can be a result of numerous factors. Firstly, let's talk about skill levels in education. Generally, jobs that require high skill levels, specialized knowledge, or advanced education tend to pay more. It's a matter of supply and demand. Fewer people possess the necessary qualifications for these jobs, meaning the supply of labor is low. On the other hand, the demand for these skills is high. Therefore, to attract and retain the limited pool of qualified individuals, employers offer higher wages. For instance, a software engineer typically needs a bachelor's degree in computer science or a related field, and often specific programming skills. This specialized education and skill set usually lead to higher wages compared to jobs that require less specialized knowledge, like a high school teacher. But skill levels and education aren't the only factors at play. Market demand also plays a significant role in wage differentials. When the demand for a particular job is high and the supply of workers who can do that job is low, wages tend to increase. Conversely, if there's an oversupply of individuals capable of performing a particular job, wages may decrease due to the surplus labor. Lastly, let's not forget about bargaining power. Unions, for example, can negotiate higher wages for their members. In industries or jobs where union membership is high, wage rates can be significantly higher than in non-unionized sectors. So, while it might seem unfair that a software engineer earns more than a high school teacher, it's important to remember that these wage differentials reflect a complex interplay of factors. These include the level of education and skills required, the market demand for those skills, and the bargaining power of workers. Wage differentials, therefore, are a reflection of a myriad of factors beyond just the job role. Ever heard of economic rent or transfer earnings? These may sound like complex terms, but they're actually fundamental concepts in the world of economics that directly impact your paycheck. Let's break them down. Transfer earnings refer to the minimum amount of income that a worker must receive to keep them in their current employment. It's essentially the opportunity cost of a worker's labor, the wage they could earn in the next best alternative job. For instance, if a teacher could earn $30,000 a year as a writer, that's their transfer earnings. They wouldn't teach unless they were offered at least that amount. On the other hand, economic rent is the extra income a worker receives above their transfer earnings. It's the premium that comes from possessing a unique skill, talent, or experience that's in high demand but short supply. Let's stick with our teacher example. If they're a highly sought-after specialist in a specific educational field, they might earn an additional $20,000 a year above their transfer earnings. That's their economic rent, the extra reward for their unique expertise. Now, what factors affect these two components of wage? The main driver of transfer earnings is the market wage rate for alternative jobs. If the wage rates in other sectors rise, the transfer earnings will also increase. Economic rent, meanwhile, is influenced by the uniqueness of a worker's skills and the demand for those skills. The higher the demand and the rarer the skills, the higher the economic rent. In the labor market, employers are willing to pay the transfer earnings to secure the necessary labor. The economic rent, however, is a matter of negotiation. Employers may be willing to pay a premium for workers with unique skills, but only if they believe those skills will bring significant value to their business. So, transfer earnings and economic rent are crucial components of your wage that often go unnoticed. Understanding them can give you a new perspective on your income and what you bring to the labor market. So, can the government really mess up the labor market? We've delved into the intricacies of labor market forces, exploring how the demand and supply of labor are shaped by multiple factors, including wage and non-wage elements. We've seen how the equilibrium wage rate and employment are determined in perfect markets and how this picture changes in imperfect markets, where trade unions, government intervention, and monopsony employers come into play. We've also examined wage differentials, understanding how variations in pay can arise from the dynamics of the labor market itself. We've unpacked the concepts of transfer earnings and economic rent, shedding light on how they are affected within different occupations. Throughout this journey, we've seen how government intervention can both help and hinder these processes, potentially causing shifts and movements along the demand and supply curves of labor. Understanding these concepts can help you navigate and appreciate the complexities of the labor market and the potential impacts of government intervention.